Hello, my name is Bailey. I had the privilege of working with Lily throughout the fall semester for 10 lessons. So as you can see by the title, this is Liliana's portfolio. And this portfolio just consists of 6 artifacts I've collected that I feel will take you guys through her growth that I've noticed throughout the semester and just her understanding of the text we have read and gone over. And so I had a primary learning goal going into this lesson after conducting assessments for Lily, and something that stood out to me was just her ability to apply her own personal self to those texts. And so honestly, just thinking deeper, from her understanding of what she read about and being able to find similarities and differences from what she read to her own story, her own self, and applying that. And so the primary learning goal I had set was reading texts on other races and cultures in order to find similarities and differences of what we read about and comparing that to her own story. And so basically what that means is we really focused on Lily's comprehension of the text and just doing activities that allows her to show and share her comprehension of the text while also applying that to herself, and just asking personal questions like, how can you relate to this? Do you find similarities or differences between you and the author? What do you think the author is trying to teach us based off of what we read about? And so, yeah, that was the primary learning goal because Lily did show interest in learning about other cultures and other races. So I thought this was a perfect opportunity for her to not only learn about others, but also learn about oh, this is, we're not so different after all. And so going into artifact number 1, this is just a snapshot of our first lesson together. We read a book called Let's Talk About Race by Julius Lester. And throughout that reading, we read the book into 3 chunks. The first chunk was our story and what makes up our story. And so this is what this artifact represents, is Lily's story. And so throughout the reading, we made notes together of what we learned about the author's story. And so what that includes is that we learned that the author's story starts when he was born, which was January 27th, 1939. And as you can see at the top, Lily, when I had her fill her story out after we read, she said that her story also begins when she was born, and she even included her birthday because that's the day she was born. And we also marked what makes up our story, because there's a lot of different things that make up each of our stories other than race or religion. And so we put down, I had her identify the author's favorite food, hobbies, their favorite color, their religion, their nationality, and their race. And we did this because, not only is this what makes up our story, but we did this because this also supports her understanding of the text, to see if what we read about she could recall and could remember. And she did this wonderfully. We wrote down that the author's favorite food was fish, that his hobbies include crossword puzzles and photography and cooking, that the author's religion was actually Jewish, their nationality is from the United States. Favorite color was red, green, orange, and purple. The author had many favorite colors. And this author's race is African American. And so for her independent work, I had Lily, fill out those areas of her story, and she shared with me that her favorite food was mac and cheese. And like a difference, when I was asking her to find similarities and differences between her and the author, she's like, a difference is the author likes fish. And she shared with me that she doesn't like fish, but that she likes mac and cheese. And so that was kind of a great way for her to kind of like introduce like finding those similarities and differences between herself and what we read about. She also shared with me that she likes art, and that she likes to read and run. For religion, she said that she was a Christian, so that's also another difference she recognized was the difference between her and the author, is that the author is Jewish, and that she is a Christian. And I'm really proud of this next part because for a similarity, she noticed that the author's nationality was the United States, and that is her nationality as well. And so that was kind of sweet for me to at least like start right from the get-go, her ability to, find those similarities and differences between her story and the author's. And then another similarity she noted was favorite colors between her and the author, which was purple is what we identified, and she pointed out to me. And a difference between her and the author was their race. She's white, and the author is African American. And so at the bottom, we do have two separate questions. How does the color of skin affect you in your story? And though the words on the paper are short, Lily was able to, and I wish I would have like audio recorded some of our lessons, but she was able to write I am different, and I asked her to elaborate on that more with me. And like I'm like, okay, like what makes you different? Like how does then the color of your skin affect you in your story? And she was able to share that because our skin like colors are different, that doesn't mean that like, we're completely like separate. And that there are parts of your story that like set you apart from one another. And that's what makes each of us unique. And I asked her what was the most important thing about her story, and she said her religion. And so this was the first artifact, kind of like an introduction to what we would be like diving in and learning about together. And that was just finding similarities and differences between her and the author, or what she's reading about in the text, and being able to apply that then to a grand like a larger picture. So yeah, going into artifact number 2, if I can get this to go. Alright, so going into artifact number 2, this was actually part of lesson 2 where we continued reading Let's Talk About Race by Julius Lester. And yeah, so a quote from this portion is, just as I am a story and you are a story and countries tell stories about themselves, race is a story too. And so there's just a series of questions, as you can see on the paper, on the slide, is we talked about, we read about just how race is a part of our story, and there are some comprehension questions on this paper. And though there's not a whole lot of, detail to each of her responses, mainly because she preferred telling me her, and why she answered each part yes or no. It was, it was kind of more, I think she found it a little bit more difficult to put it down on paper and just verbally tell me her reasoning behind that. So kind of wish I would have audio recorded our conversations there so I could share those with you guys. But just an overall, I was able to gauge her comprehension not only of what we read about during this topic of race, but it also reached back to what we had first talked about in our first lesson, which was about what makes up each of our stories. And so just going through this worksheet of her comprehension, is race an important part of someone's life? And she answered yes. Is a person the color of their skin, their eyes, and their hair? Sorry. And she said yes. Just meaning that, you know, those characteristics make up who you are, those physical characteristics. If a person were to change their skin, hair, and eyes, would they be the same person? And she said no. And she actually wrote a supportive note next to that saying we would not look the same. And so, yeah, that was a great answer. I don't think there was really no right or wrong answer, but she was able to support the majority of her responses with supporting detail, whether it's just from the text or just from what she thinks overall. And the fourth question is race an important part of your story? And she said yes, which was great because we had just talked about stories 2 days prior, the lesson prior to that, of each, like what makes up each of our stories. So like our hobbies, our, religion, our favorite color, when our story begins, which is, she shared with me, it was when we were born, and race. And so that was kind of sweet, because she was remembering what we had talked about the class prior and, applying that to this lesson. And her support for that was because it makes up you, which is great because our race is what makes up us. And it is an important part of our story because that's, our culture, that's where we come from. So yeah, going into artifact number 3. All right, so going into artifact number 3, I'm sure you can already tell that this artifact is a little different from the previous 2, and that's because Lily loves drawing, and I wanted to find a way for her to show her understanding or comprehension of a text and what we have been reading and learning about in a meaningful way to her, and that's through art. She shared with me when we first started that she loves to draw, and she actually showed me her notebook that she draws in, and I thought that would be also a great idea because a lot of the things she drew about were what she read about, such as, I think it's called The Bad Guys Club, which is one of her favorite graphic novels, and she liked drawing about what she read about. And so since I wanted to kind of change it up a bit and fit her learning style and what she likes to do, I introduced this method. It's called transmediation. It's just a way for students to have the ability to draw an important part or just an important message of what we had been of what they had read about or learned about, and draw it. And so instead of asking comprehension questions through paper and having her write it down, I just asked her to retell what we had learned about that day, and over the past 3 lessons. And that was the past 3 lessons we went over the book Let's Talk About Race by Julius Lester. And so she was able to tell me what she had learned about how what parts make up our stories. Is race an important part of our story? And then she drew, as you can see, this is kind of sweet. So she drew herself, and then she drew the author, Julius. And I was kind of asking her why did you draw them the same size? And she said, because we're the same. And so that was kind of sweet, a sweet way for me to, to see her understanding of the text and what we have talked about, that even though our stories are different, that they're still the same. And yeah, this was her pictorial representation of Let's Talk About Race. And yeah, I think this really worked well for her to show her creative side and also show her understanding of what we had been learning about. All right, for artifact number 4, this is probably one of my favorite artifacts just because this worked really well for Lily in supporting her understanding and comprehension. So this is definitely a method I would like for her to continue, as I will cover in the goals for Lily I have in the final slide. But anyway, this artifact comes from when we were reading We Are Grateful by Tracy Sorrell. Because November is Native American Heritage Month, and so I chose to focus on the lessons regarding Native Americans. Because it's November is Thanksgiving. That's one of the major holidays. But I thought it'd be great for her to learn how the Native Americans are grateful and how they show they're grateful. And so, this method was actually introduced to me in my Teach 209 class, which is the class that this clinical is a part of. And so I spend, the first half of my day in this class and then the other half with Lily in clinicals. And so this was a method that a teacher in a video we watched was using with her students for them to help with their understanding or comprehension of a text that they were reading whenever they come across difficult words. And I actually gave Lily a actual copy of the steps for her to keep in her reader's bin, just in case she ever comes across a difficult word. But so when we were reading We Are Grateful, Lily stopped. That's the first step of the method, is to stop when you come across a difficult word. Either you can stop when you get to the word or at the end of the passage of what you're reading. Stop, identify the difficult word, so underline it if you're able to, such as when you're reading like a paper article, or, maybe sticking a Post-it note next to it or writing it down, which is what we did in our activity since we couldn't mark up the book. And then think is the second step. And so what that means is thinking about what the difficult word could mean by using context clues from the text, pictures, just trying to figure out what that word could mean. And then that goes into replacing the word. So once you have used context clues to figure out that word's meaning, replacing it then with a simpler word where she does know the understanding of or definition of the word that fits that context. And then rereading for comprehension, since she went through the process of replacing the difficult word with a simpler one, a word she does know, rereading then for her to understand what the text is saying. And so we did this for We Are Grateful. And looking at the artifact, Lily did a wonderful job. I wanted her to find a minimum of 4 difficult words during her independent work, and she did that. And so the 2 examples I'm going to highlight on are actually the middle 2. So as you can see, the top words on the left column is the difficult word, and then the bottom word, the word written below it, is the replacement word. And so Lily identified lullabies as a difficult word and replaced it with the word songs because Lily used context clues from the reading that where it talked about how the elders of the Native Americans like to sing lullabies to the babies of the Cherokee people. And Lily knew using the context clues in the pictures that lullabies also means songs, and so chose that as her replacement word. And then for the word mature, which was fabulous because mature can mean different things, especially in this context, because the word mature was referring to crops, and Lily figured out that mature in this text meant grow, which is true. So that was great that she was able to use this 4-step method in identifying a difficult word, replacing it in order to support her comprehension. And the way I knew how, if she comprehended or understood the text and the replacement word she chose was by rereading, but then using the idea of transmediation as a way to draw what that replacement word meant within the text. And so we were learning about how the Cherokees practice how they're grateful and just traditions they have during this time. And so for lullabies, she drew one of the elders singing lullabies or songs to the baby, as well as for mature, where she replaced it with the word grow, and she drew crops because that's what it was talking about in the story. So that is a fantastic way for Lily to show her comprehension is through art, and then having this method in her back pocket when reading if she ever came across a difficult word. So going into my fifth artifact, this one I wanted to change things up because we had been, doing transmediation as a way for comprehension, so drawing, as well as identifying difficult words. So I kind of wanted to try the who, what, when, where, why method, just paying attention to different parts of a story, like who's involved in the story, like who are the characters, where is it taking place, when is it taking place, why are they doing what they're doing, how are they doing it, and yeah, where. I can't remember if I said where or not, but that's basically it. So we were reading a book related to Native American Heritage Month, and the book was called Fry Bread, and it just takes you through how that's like a tradition in Cherokee households is fry bread. And as you can see in this artifact, I have two separate artifacts, but they go together. And so at the bottom picture, I had Lily write down something, a tradition or just something special that she does within her family. And so she chose to write down that her and her grandma, they make cookies with a secret recipe, which was super cool. And related to kind of what we had just learned about, which was like them making fry bread and why they make it. And then I have this little diagram at the top, categorizing it: who, where, when, what, why, and how. I added in the how just for her to let me know what ingredients she used in order to make the secret cookie recipe. And so for the who, this was great because she was able to show, who's involved. She drew her and her grandma. And then for what, she drew a circle, which represents the cookie, and the secret recipe card right there. And then when, and she drew her grandma's house because she said they make it when she goes to her grandma's house, which was super cool. Where, she drew the kitchen, because that's typically where you bake or cook in a house. Why? This was neat because this also related, this tied to what we had just read about prior, for the fry bread. So we used this method when reading fry bread, and the characters that are and or the who, where, when, why they make it. And so this was neat because that's a tradition that's been passed on through many generations. And so for why, Lily wrote 3 recipe cards with arrows going down, meaning this has been a recipe that's been passed down from generation to generation. So that was kind of neat that she thought about doing it, putting that as the why, because that's kind of what we talked about in our reading about the fry bread for Cherokee people. And then for how, she just drew ingredients that you usually make when you make cookies, such as eggs, milk, and flour. So yeah. So, alright, going into the sixth and final artifact I have chosen for Lily's portfolio actually comes from our 10th and final lesson, where we were finishing up the book We Are Still Here, another book by Tracy Sorrell, and also wrapping up, November being Native American Heritage Month. And yeah, one of the goals was taking the morals and lessons, not only that she took away from this specific book, but also from the previous 9 lessons and what we had read and discussed. Since I was wanting her to understand what the texts were saying, and finding similarities and differences between herself and the author or the text, and just identifying ways that the author was trying to teach us, which she did a wonderful job of doing. which is great because this was a long semester, and so it was fantastic that she was able to remember what we had first talked about up until this 10th and final lesson. And so, yeah, on this paper, this was just a way for her to show her understanding of the text. So just taking the morals and lessons from books, meaning the book we were reading, We Are Still Here, as well as the previous books, and how we can take that then into the real world. And so a few examples that Lily identified, not only from this book, but also through the semester, is one, culture is important, which is fantastic, because we are talking about cultures and race, and that it is an important part of who we are. The next being freely practice religion. She actually pulled that one from the text that we were wrapping up during this lesson, which is We Are Still Here, because we had learned that the Native Americans aren't allowed to freely practice their religion, whereas, in the U.S. Christianity, you can't freely practice your religion. And so that was kind of sweet, because not only were we, taking morals and lessons from all the lessons and books we had read, but that this also was a way for her to show her comprehension of the book we had just read about as well. So that's fantastic that she was able to pull that from the text, as well as she was also able to pull from this book that change needs to happen, because that's what this book, talked about. Like, yeah, the Native Americans are being treated unfair, but that they're still here and they're gonna keep persisting. And Lily identified that change needs to happen in order for them to be treated fairly, which is fantastic, a fantastic lesson and moral to take from the books into the real world. And yeah, then Lily also identified being yourself. This tied into the first lesson she told me of what makes up our stories. There's a bunch of different things that make up our story. And yeah, she identified just being yourself because we're each unique, even though we do have similarities and differences. And one other is that everyone is different, which is fantastic. So, wrapping up Lily's portfolio, there are a few goals I have for Lily. One of which being using the methods we have practiced during her independent work or in school in general, especially the method of stop, think, replace, and reread, because I really saw that work for Lily to support understanding of the text. There's always going to be a word you come across that's going to be difficult or that you might not truly know the meaning of. Trust me, it happens to me all the time, even at this college level. And just stopping and using context clues to think about what that word could mean, and then replacing it with a simpler word, and then rereading to support your comprehension, that is something that I feel like could be used onwards, like the rest of the semester and each grade after second grade. So that's a goal I have for you. Another goal is to just find, in whatever you're reading or learning about, identifying similarities or differences between you and the text. And, most of the time there's not always going to be a way you could, find similarities to reading. Oftentimes it's probably a little bit more difficult, but you could go into readings, thinking about, like, how is this different from me? Because it gets you to think more critically about the text and engaging with the text. So that's kind of like a goal I have for you, is how can you engage in the text to support, your understanding. So there's going to be many things that you're going to read that you might not be able to relate to or find many similarities. But, that's not always the case. You can always go into readings and, be like, how is this different from me? Especially when you're learning about other people, famous people such as Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King or, Abraham Lincoln, like all these people that have come before us who are famous. just for leaving their print in the world, and just, finding those similarities but also differences. Differences aren't bad because it makes you think more broad of how, like, just how each of us are different. That's kind of what we talked about when we were talking about stories and what makes up our stories, and just finding those similarities and differences. So that's definitely like the main goal and takeaway I have for you, Lily, is to just engage with the texts however you can, and then using the comprehension techniques that I've introduced to you to support your understandings. Even if that means drawing for comprehension, if that's going to help you remember, like, to support your understanding of what you read or learned about, great, awesome, do that. But then I also encourage you to be able to kind of try to apply that then with writing to support whatever you drew. So yeah,